Just do it.
Today I'm speaking to Rudolf Huber. It's his third time as a guest on my channel. Rudolf is my LNG guy. Welcome to the channel.
Thank you. Good to be here again.
Yeah. For those who haven't heard you before, what is your credentials?
In LNG or everything?
Well, LNG mostly. I mean, what's relevant to the discussion?
Okay, well, I still have to go back a little bit further. It's before I joined the energy world, which was more or less an accident in my life. I went to law school, became an in-house lawyer, and did all the lawyer stuff. It's everything up to actually really becoming a lawyer. And when I did my clerkship at the court, which is mandatory here in Austria, I got a call from somebody I know very well who works for the largest energy company in Austria. And he asked me if I was willing to look into some supply stuff. I need to go a bit further back. I spent 5.5 years in the Middle East, mostly in Syria and Egypt. And I'm extremely familiar with those cultures over there. Those people speak the languages to a certain degree. And he needed somebody for the Middle East, for especially that, because he had a couple of projects going on down there. And OMV at the time was very, very Russia-centric. That means there were lots of people that spoke excellent Russian and knew their way around Moscow and everything, but he had nobody for the Middle East. So that's how I entered the energy world. To be totally frank and honest, I really didn't think very much of energy before I entered the energy world, because I was a consumer of media as anybody else is, and I had probably more or less the same set of opinions that most people have, just because I never really took the effort to think those things a little deeper and to work those things to the bone.
And you also learn about these things rather through experience than on a TV, obviously, or
Yeah,
even through books.
absolutely. Look, that's maybe the second good thing on me. I'm a learning by doing guy. I got the academic credentials, but to be perfectly honest, is I do learn and I do my best work when I'm in the middle of the battle. So
Right.
it's you just throw me in, and sometimes when I develop new projects in Africa, I opened a swath of countries like Nigeria, Angola, Gabon, Congo for OMV. And when you enter those countries, you essentially go down there for the first time. You really have no idea what you're doing. You don't
Right.
even know if you're going to meet the people that you're supposed to meet. You agree meetings, but in Africa, it happens more than once that the person that
Definitely.
you're supposed to meet doesn't even turn up.
And today you're working as a rather independent consultant for the energy sector, right?
Yes, part. It's I'm doing some consulting work still, but only for a very select group of clients. It's a very small group, and I haven't taken a new client now in years. The reason is not that I'm
Right.
not getting them. The reason is that I like to simplify my life. I'm a very small boutique company, and I have a very limited capacity of taking on work. And it's so far in 10 years, I have refused actually to take bigger offices and employees. And the reason for that is a private one. I've got a handicapped child, and those kind of things actually make you reconsider life's priorities. So I have a very select small group of clients, some of them for about 10 years now, that I'm doing work for. I'm not very, very keen on taking on new clients, except
Right.
if the project is really absolutely fantastic. And on the other side, I'm doing a lot of lobbying, especially for methane gas.
Right.
The reason for that is very simply that I consider methane gas to be the next backbone of the developed world, energy world.
And that's the reason I got you. Obviously, it's in the Russian-Ukraine era. The war has started. And last year when I spoke to you, you gave us, an overview of the energy sector. you were of the opinion that the shortages we were seeing predating the war was because of spot trading happening too much, not a lot of investment taking place when it should have taken place, and then before you had a shortage, right? So can you maybe just give us that framework again? What was the methane LNG situation in Europe or in the world for that matter before the Russian war?
The situation hasn't gotten simpler. It's actually getting more complicated every year. The reason is there's not one reason. There's a whole plethora of reasons. But one of the reasons is that the world, especially the energy companies and politics in the developed world, had grown very, very comfortable over the last, I would say, almost 20 years. That means companies and politics together are not very keen on taking far-reaching strategic decisions to do things that will, of course, rile up a couple of people. So we have a tendency of externalizing our problems. Means anything that's somehow might get somebody angry. You send it to China, you send it to Russia, you do your energy stuff somewhere where nobody sees it. And that has been going on now for about 20 years. I remember when I was a child, my own country was still building hydro power plants. I mean, you can't even consider that. It's you will have so much political activism if you just do a very, very small one, that this is totally impossible. So politicians and companies, they tend to import the goods as far as they can, tend to pay the price, and they try to make their life a little less miserable by pushing more trading. So to say, to camouflage, let's say, their lack of investment in anything, be it the grid, be it power plants, be it fueling, be it oil drilling, whatever it is. It's things have become exceedingly political, and that has taken a very, very nasty turn again over the last 5 years. So there's activism of the sort that we have never seen before.
So the high energy prices we had, we have now, that is not just, it's not just Vladimir Putin, basically.
No,
that is the consequence of all these, in political factors. I'm going to argue coming, before the war.
I mean, look, oil prices were at about 80 before anybody thought that the war in Ukraine is actually going to become a war. I mean, even before Russia concentrated troops on the border, before anybody thought about anything like this, we were at $80 per barrel. Now we are at around $100 per barrel. So in a sense, you're able to argue that, the war put $20 per barrel on top. But I mean, we went from a pretty high price to an even higher price. That's it. It's not from very cheap. But if you just look back a little further, I mean, just go back about 2.5 years, and you will find negative oil prices. What's increased is not the total price. What's increased is the extreme volatility of pricing in anything. Because even gas prices, I mean, it's not so long ago, just 2 years or so, when you couldn't find a place for LNG tanker. You couldn't find a terminal where you could unload your LNG tanker for any price, even if you paid them sometimes. So that's just about 2 years ago. It's not so long. And now we're in a situation of absolute scarcity. That is partly to do with, of course, a constant lack of investment. So that means the fat in the system that usually keeps us comfortable in rough times is more or less gone. So now, whenever something goes wrong in whatever system that we are living in, you feel that much quicker all through the entire value chain. And the second thing is also that there's not only a lack of investment, but there is also a lack of strategic decision making. People just don't want to be responsible for anything, whatever it is.
And that's on the European Union, that's on a European Union level, and that's also on a national level. I suppose some countries are a little bit better than others with that, but overall, it's bad view.
Certainly, there's diversity, but if you look all over Europe, I mean, most countries in Europe actually do more or less the same thing. They try to externalize almost anything. There's exceptions, like, for example, in countries like Spain or Portugal, on the fringes of Europe, those people are way more exposed to external shocks. Because they have always been on the fringes of Europe, and they have never been so embedded in the European energy infrastructure as, for example, a country like Germany or France has been. And therefore, they always needed to make sure that they're actually getting the energy when they need it. That means they were always paying premiums. Spanish LNG prices were always the highest in Europe. They need terminals that function fundamentally different from any terminal that you would find in northwestern Europe. They are usually here in order to supply a city, not so much to pump gas into the grid in Spain. And the interconnection between the different cities in Spain is there, but it's more, let's say, it's something that allows you to swap volumes, but it's not here for real trading. That's not what it's built for. So those places are still a little bit more solid because they pay. Japan, for example, has always been a country that paid the highest LNG prices. Why? Because their options are extremely limited. And that's why they pay the highest prices. Here in Europe, we had the luxury of camouflaging all our problems in something like an integrated trading environment. Lots of different companies that compete with each other, and a very, very large and very developed market. Of course, when things go wrong in a big beast like Europe, well, then that has consequences, as we see right now. But
and just the last point on this, France. France, I think Sweden. I guess you can argue Norway, maybe even Austria, are, I suppose, less dependent on gas in some aspects. Some aspects they are not. What is your view on that? They have more of a blended mix in the energy system.
Well, it depends on geography, of course, because I mean, in France's case, it's not so much geography; it's their historical development of nuclear that keeps them a lot safer than a country like Germany, for example, which I believe is one of the worst basket cases that we have in the entire continent. My own country, Austria, for example, we have copious hydropower. It's not our decision to develop hydropower. We've got the mountains, we've got the rivers, and there was a time when building a large hydropower plants actually was very sexy. That's long ago. I was a small child when the last ones were built. But those things are here now, and we're living off them. So we have to thank our forefathers to have enough foresight to build the infrastructure that is today softening the blows. It doesn't exclude us from that, because even a country like France with all its nuclear power, or a country like Austria with all its hydropower, they cannot really extricate themselves from any shock that hits the European continent anymore. But I do fully expect, if ever we see day-long or week-long blackouts, that Austrian engineering teams will go to the border and cut the connections to Europe, so we have our electricity.
It can get that. It can get that extreme if it comes down to it.
Yeah, well, when people are dark and cold, things happen very quickly, actually. So that's going to happen. But there's countries like Germany, for example, which are geographically not that favored. They have closed down their nukes. They want to close down most of their coal, and they're going for an all-renewable policy, which is, in my eyes, a recipe for total disaster.
And I question the feasibility of 100% renewable beyond, say, 20-25%. There's a limit. I'm not sure what the limit is, but I'm very skeptical if you can push it further than it's currently being pushed.
Many years ago, I wrote an article I called Lunar Strawberries. And therein, I asked the question, are we able to raise strawberries on the surface of the moon? Of course we are. We have the technology. We could go there, could have a lunar station, we could create all the conditions for raising strawberries. And once they're raised, we could bring them back to Earth, and those would probably be the most expensive strawberries anybody has ever eaten. Are we able to do that? Yeah, of course we are. Is that a good use of our resources? Of course not. It's absolutely stupid. And the same thing here is could we create a 100% renewable Germany? We probably could. I don't know if this is a country I would ever want to live in then, but yes, we can. The consequences will be disastrous. the population will suffer heinously. People will die because when it gets cold, people freeze to death. When energy prices are very high, people freeze, people go hungry. That's a normal thing in any society. Those things, those tendencies, just going to grow worse. And at some point, there will be somebody who will pin a number on that and make somebody responsible. I don't hear you now. You're mute.
Sorry, let's get into that now with the reflection on Russia. What is the dependency of Europe on Russian gas? Because I hear a lot of numbers being thrown around, from 40% to 20%. I don't know how to gauge it.
First, it's country dependent. There are countries that take almost all of their gas from Russia, like Bulgaria, for example. That's 100% Russia. And there are other countries that take some Russian gas, but if it doesn't come, well, no big deal. Then the other thing you have to take into account is that today's gas infrastructures in Europe and a good part of Europe are pretty interconnected. That means companies do not hesitate to swap volumes. And the way how Germany has attracted electricity, for example, when it needed it because their renewables didn't work, was they paid the highest price. That's it. And
Right.
there's companies in my own country. Actually, I'm pretty sure that a manager in a utility in Austria, if they have the opportunity to make quite a nice side basket of money by cutting out Austrian consumers, for example, and giving them the more expensive electricity, they will do so. Well, we would probably do that if we're in that position. Yeah, it's just how a market works. So, how dependent are we on Russian gas? Here, we must clean up a little bit on what Russian gas really is, because today we have two Russian gases, and they come on top of each other. People never make the difference, and the Russians don't encourage anybody to make any kind of difference between the two Russian gas systems. You've got the old legacy gas system that was developed in the Soviet Union, developed, built, and completely operated in the Soviet Union. This legacy gas system was essentially bankrupted when the Soviet Union went out of business, and then reinstated for a penny, an apple and egg. And then those people Gazprom was essentially able to sell gas on operation cost and some repairs to the pipeline system. But they never had to really pay off any kind of investments, which naturally made Russian gas the cheapest gas there is. Very
because
simply,
the Soviet Union paid for the infrastructure, so to
exactly.
say.
They paid in money and blood. Yeah. So it was all there. So why not use it while it's there, which is legitimate. There's nothing wrong with that. On the other side is those old legacy fields. They are depleting slowly. And even giant fields, there's one day comes a day when they're empty. That's just nature of the game. And the two largest fields that support the legacy gas system are Urengoy and Jamburg. Those are two fields that have been developed in the 60s and 70s, respectively. And more than 10 years ago, I learned that Urengoy was slated to deplete, wait for it, in 2022. And Jamburg was slated to deplete in 2024. So that's something that we have known for way more than 10 years now. And the gas field, when it depletes, is not like an oil field. An oil field, you pump for years. You use enhanced oil recovery techniques in order to get more oil out of the field. That can go on for decades. In a gas field, when it starts to deplete, when the pressure drops, some of the fields, 18 months, and it's over. And there's no more gas coming out of there. Now, if you consider that the vast majority of the legacy gas comes out of those two fields, and those two fields are slated to deplete, the bigger one of them, Urengoy, this year. Wow, that tells you something. Now, the Russians, of course, knew that.
That puts the war into a much bigger context.
Yeah, it is. It does. I mean, I don't know. That might be an accident. I have no idea. Yeah, it's just something.
But I mean, it's not that it's accident. I mean, the price of oil has incentivized. Let me use that word. wars in the
Yeah,
Middle East in the past. It's not
yeah.
that it's planned because of it, and we don't go that far, but incidentally, there's always been a war party in Russia. There's always been one in America, and when the price of oil goes high, those cases always get amplified in the process.
Yeah.
And I won't be surprised if this was a catalyst to the already whatever narrative was building up.
We tend to overinterpret those things.
Yeah,
The way I see this, I'm not a war expert. I don't know much about the planning processes inside the Kremlin for those kind of things. But one thing I know is that many of those adventures are not really very planned out.
right.
Nobody really chews things to the bone. I mean, I know that from companies I've worked for. It's big companies, big names in the business that have pretty sterling reputations. And sometimes when I look at their projects and on what flimsy grounds they have decided for those projects, uh, I really ask myself, who the hell did the planning here?
You're not
There's
the only one. I
there
work
is
in the industry as well, and sometimes, I mean, I'm the engineer. I get paid regardless of a stupid decision sometimes, but I sometimes ask myself, what is the logic behind some of the decisions
Yeah.
being
Well,
made?
look, I don't blame it. It's just human nature.
Yeah,
It's not even pinned to a nationality because I have seen those stupid things in the U.S. as well as in the East or in Africa or in Europe, anywhere. I think there's no color to that. There's no nationality to that. It's people are being
yeah,
stupid all over the world. It's just the nature of the game, and it doesn't really irk me. Actually, in a sense, some of the consulting business I'm doing, I wouldn't have if people wouldn't mess up.
right.
So I should be happy.
So to go back to the Russian story, so you're saying well, not just saying, it's a fact that one of the big Russian gas fields is depleting this year,
Yeah.
um,
Well,
and
that's
the
what
other
it
one
was
prob
slated to. Yeah.
yeah, okay. Well, it's very close to whatever the case. We don't know if real-time data probably, but it's
Give or
close to
take
that.
1-2 years. Maybe I
Yeah,
don't know.
and the second one is in due in 2 years' time. Now, the other thing you would ask is, but people say, but Russia has some of the largest amount of gas reserves in the world.
Yeah.
Did they invest into those to extrapolate them?
Yes. So
Not
they
really.
partly yes. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
everything that happened in the Yamal Peninsula is brand new.
yeah,
It's
heard about
mostly the
that. Yeah,
Bulgankova field and the whole slew of smaller fields. I mean, when I'm talking of smaller fields on Yamal, they are still pretty big. You can run really big projects
but
off.
now for perspective, Yamal, because I've worked on some of the projects there. That's in the far north of Russia.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
yeah,
and
but
that exactly
there's
is the problem because
yeah,
Urengoy and Jamburg, both of them are already pretty far up. So they were a challenge to develop. But at the time, Khrushchev was in charge then. At the time, nobody really cared very much about the comforts and the livelihoods of the people who went up there in order to develop that. It just if the Politburo decided for that, well, then it happened, no matter how many people died.
right.
But that is a bit different today because today you need international experts and companies to go out there and do this thing for you because uh, it has gone to a level of technical expertise that you cannot easily find in Russia anymore. There's certainly good expertise over there, but many of the very, very good experts in Russia have emigrated towards the West, and the education system has failed now for the last 35 years at least. So the last experts that have been trained under the Soviet system, they are a bit older than I am right now, and I'm in the middle of the 50s. Huh? So it's those are the youngest actually. Everything that came after came up in the post-Soviet education system, and that's not really worth anything. Yeah? So they have a problem with expertise over there, so they need to buy it from outside. And at a time when Russia is the most sanctioned country in the world, that's an obvious problem that you're having. But
Yeah,
go a little further on that Yamal thing is, uh, I remember there was an article in the German newspaper Spiegel about must be now 12, 13, 14 years ago. I don't know. I'm not sure about that. Which described the Yamal Peninsula. That was before anything had been developed over there. Well, we knew that there was a lot of gas down there, but they described the conditions over there as some of the most alien on the entire planet.
yeah,
So, and you know how it is. The more difficult the conditions for drilling are somewhere, the more expensive it becomes.
Yeah.
And that's where the notion of stranded gas comes in, because people seem not to understand it. They think because there's a gas field somewhere that it's automatically money. But that's not true. You need to bring
That's the same error people make with minerals in Africa. Just because stuff is in the ground doesn't mean that it's valuable.
exactly, yeah, and you need to bring the gas out. You need to condition it. You need to refine it, and then you need to transport it to somewhere where there's somebody who wants to pay a buck for it in order to use it. And that's the big advantage that American shale gas has, because if you look at the Marcellus Shale, there is drilling in Pennsylvania. And then right on top, there is the market. There is no transport. Shale gas is very, very sweet, so there's not much refining. So whatever you pay for your drilling, even if your drilling costs you a little more than it would cost you in a conventional field, doesn't matter very much, because the entire tail of costs that you usually have to face when you're in the middle of nowhere doesn't exist over there. That makes it very, very cheap.
The base way to gauge it would be what is the price at the consumer then?
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah. And if you look at Yamal, I mean, we don't get figures for Yamal. The Spiegel article has given us a couple of hints, and based on those hints, we were trying to find out what would gas in Yamal cost. Yeah, and we had a range from, I mean, depending on who we showed this whole thing to. Yeah, we had people telling us from $4 per MMBTU at the wellhead. Yeah, to $15 per MMBTU at the wellhead. That was the range. I'm not an
and for comparable examples, what do you pay in Pennsylvania or those places?
Well, there you have. I mean, in Pennsylvania, they are selling repeatedly at the market for $2 per MMBTU. That means they must produce it for far less.
Oh.
Yeah. So how do you compete with that? And that is the upstream cost. We're not talking about conditioning and transport, because if you look at the Yamal Peninsula, that's very far from anything. Because what people also misunderstand with Russia is the largest country on Earth in terms of surface on Earth, on the planet. But in fact, the usable or interesting part of Russia is a pretty small country. It's a part of European Russia. Anything west of the Urals, anything east of the Urals is completely uninteresting, because there's no wet winds going there anymore. I mean, it's very dry. It's very cold there as well. So you've got a part of European Russia, and you've got a thin sliver that hugs more or less the border to Central Asia, where conditions are comfortable enough for people who want to live there. And then you got a couple of mining towns in the north, where they go there no matter what the conditions are. But that is what Russia is. And then you have your project over there in the middle of nowhere, and have thousands of kilometers to transfer your product through. That has a price.
And another underestimated thing here is that transport of any commodity really over land is far more expensive than by ship. And Russia has only one national harbor, which is Sebastopol, and it doesn't even have access to the ocean properly. It has to go through Turkey. So, it's struggling on that as well.
It is. I mean, there's a couple of possibilities that you can use. I mean, the Yamal gas comes through a brand new pipeline system to Ust-Luga, which is close to St. Petersburg on the Baltic Sea. The problem with the Baltic Sea is that most of what Russia has over there is not deep water. That means the big LNG ships and the big oil tankers cannot come in there. They need to use shuttle ships in order to bring the volumes out, and then need to like, for example, for oil, it's 7 shuttle tankers fill up about a super tanker. That takes time and is very, very, very expensive. Yeah? So those harbors are not built for deep water operations.
The argument you're making has been, despite having lots of gas theoretically in the ground, transport, logistics, environmental conditions, operation costs, essentially everything has gone up in Russia.
Yep.
And that has made Russia lost its competitive edge. And the edge it had was because the Soviet Union built the infrastructure at an enormous cost at the time.
It has always been an emperor without clothes for me. Look, I don't know when it was, in 2014 or 15, I wrote an article and saying that when will we see the first LNG import terminal in Russia? Now, of course, at the time, everybody asked, crazy? What? I mean, one of the biggest gas producers on Earth. I mean, how would they ever import LNG? So because they're running out of gas. And I think they will run out of gas, not now, not tomorrow, but maybe within the next 10 years. That might well be. Why? Because Russians got used to gas over decades. They don't even think about that. They consume it just like, you consume your morning bread. There's no
It
thought.
sounds very similar to Saudi Arabia, blessed
Yeah.
with resources, and it's in a Dutch disease at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it is, and that's what black use pretty much any kind. I mean, even Norway is plagued by it. I mean, look at it. I mean, all this virtue signaling that they're doing in Norway is essentially because they got the money to do so until they don't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, South Africa had the issue of gold for years, and it's similar. You eventually come to a point which it's too expensive to get gold in. I think we still have most of the gold reserves in the world, but it's still cheap. It's cheaper from Australia than South Africa at the moment.
Yeah,
we're not in the top producers.
Look, I mean, logically, if it's for me, I'm thinking like a trader because I have been working for a trading company for many years, and so trader thinking actually came into my mind. For me, it doesn't really matter very much where things come from. For me, it matters what is the quality. If the quality is equivalent, then cost becomes the big differentiator. And if Russia has gigantic gas fields and oil fields, that's for we know of the Barents Sea, for example, Stockman. I don't know. Have you ever heard that name? Stockman, if I remember correctly, it's in the Barents Sea. It's north of Murmansk, about 600 kilometers out in the Barents Sea. Yeah? And it's a gigantic field. We know it's there. We know there's an enormous amount of gas in there. Enough gas maybe to keep Europe, at least a good part of Europe, comfortable for many years, decades even. So it's a super field, that's for sure. I think it was 2014 when Gazprom decided to shelve Stockman. Why? Because the development is so expensive. Because there's no way on earth you can develop this gas field for an upstream cost of less than $10 per MMBTU.
You cannot do it, and the market rate is much lower.
That looks nice when you have a market price of $25 per MMBTU or $30 per MMBTU, but that is the exception, because if you follow natural gas prices, even in Europe, they spend way more time below the $10 per MMBTU mark than above. So you're never gonna make your money back. And even Gazprom understood that. That's why they shelved the project. You have gas fields that we know of in the Kara Sea, for example, that are gigantic but just impossible to develop. Yeah.
What is your view on Nord Stream 2 now? Because is that going forward, or they cancelled it?
Well, no, it's more or less built as far as I understand. So it's I don't know if there's much to be done in order to switch it on. If there's the political will, that probably could be switched on in very, very short time. So this is a legal and a political issue that they have over there. But if you just pick apart Nord Stream, not only 2 but 1 as well, I mean, partly it has been built because the gas from Yamal needs to be transported. It has a totally different pipeline strand. There is no good reason for that to go through Ukraine. That is a valid reason itself, because Yamal is a different place. Okay, that's good. But then if you look again at the cost, if I don't know what the upstream cost of Yamal is. I mean, maybe somebody wants to put something in comments and educate us about that. But Russians are not very known for being very transparent with their figures. I mean, neither are Saudi Arabians or anybody else in this business. This is not the most transparent business.
In any of these state-owned entities.
Yeah, that's why you have to consume anything you get from them with a bucket full of salt. That's what you will need for that. You consume that. But I mean, let's just consider a couple of dollars of upstream cost. I mean, let's really cut it low and say $4 per MMBTU, $5 per MMBTU. I would think that's a stretch, but let's just consider that. Then you need to transport a couple of 1,000 kilometers until you hit Ust-Luga on the Baltic Sea. Of onshore pipeline that needs to be built, that needs to be operated. That's not for free. Yeah.
Well, the way I look at it this way is the distance from Amsterdam to Moscow is shorter than the distance from Moscow, which is not even where the gas arrives in Europe, to the Yamal and to some of these places, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're sitting with geography as your main obstacle here, and there's no
Exactly.
technology that can overcome that distance. And then
And
it's geography on land compared to water.
I have argued in the past that Russia is using the very cheap gas that they're getting from Urengoy and Yamburg still now to subsidize developments in Yamal, which produces very expensive gas. And as Russia has a uniform gas system, which more or less commingles all the gas in one single system, and you buy just gas, no matter where the molecules come from. It's absolutely impossible actually to make out what costs what, which in a sense is very, very harmful for especially Russia, because the problem is that it opens the door for all kinds of cheating, and companies cheat internally more than anything else. Managers cheat because they want to make sure that bonuses come around. Managers don't want bad news to get to the upper layers. In order to save the careers, experts already, workers,
And the worst thing you can do as an engineer is to correct your manager.
yeah.
You know.
And so this is happening in any company,
Yeah.
and any company, as soon as you start to take basic transparency mechanisms out and make things even more murky, that just encourages people to actually go way more, let's say, cheaty.
Yeah.
Anywhere. That's not a Russian problem. That's a problem anywhere on Earth again.
Yeah, it's a game theory problem.
Yeah.
But so, what is your view on this thing that Russia is now asking countries to pay in ruble as a, it was sort of gone through social media. People were saying this is a genius move to bypass sanctions. What's your view on
No.
that thing?
How does that bypass sanctions? Look, sanctions. The sanctions package has so far not forbidden countries to buy gas from Russia. So I don't know how that would change the
Well,
whole
the
game.
argument being thrown out is that if you would pay Russia in dollar or euro, they can't use the euro because they're locked out of SWIFT. So
Yeah.
they are basically saying you need to pay me in ruble, and what it comes down to is actually paying them in gold, because the ruble will probably be exchanged for gold directly. Okay, you sit with all the gold, whatever. The question is that a genius move? Is that going to impact anything? The ruble has been strengthening against the dollar. That might be speculation.
Because all those Western companies are forced to buy a ruble, which of course strengthens the ruble artificially until they don't buy it anymore, and the ruble falls off a cliff again. Yeah. So this is short-term financial gimmicks. It's not going to hold up for very long. As soon as if real sanctions are going to be taken, which is if for me, I don't know. It's a political decision only. But as soon as sanctions are going to be taken, and if sanctions are going to be taken, then it doesn't matter anymore what currency Russia wants to be paid in, because the countries won't be able to buy the commodity anymore. Full
And
stop.
there won't be middlemen and things of that sort to bypass it.
No, there won't be.
Because
Look, there will always be middlemen in gambling, but in gas, it's very, very difficult because the pipelines are where they are. You know, you don't play around too much with that. You know pretty soon where things come from. If sanctions have real spine in them, again, we need to see: will we have a sanction package that's more or less window dressing, but not really very, very serious? Or will we have real stiff sanctions? And as things look right now, it looks more on the stiff side than anywhere else. Yeah? So if sanctions are really stiff, you won't cheat on that. The currency gimmick is not going to save anybody here.
Well, one thing that pushes up the price as well is the fact that insurance companies are sanctioned. So, transportation always has insurance, or future trading is a form of insurance, essentially. And that entire market has gone away. If you trade in rubles at the moment.
Sure. Look, we have, in Europe, we have become very complacent over the last 20 years. If you look over the last 20 years, virtually almost every year, gas sales volumes were bigger than the last. Yeah, so it always grew more because people grew comfortable with that. It's when I was a child, the
Yeah.
first molecules of gas hit Western Europe, and when the Soviet Union then sold its gas, and it was marked up as high-risk gas because nobody knew what to think of the Soviet Union. How reliable will they be? Will they abuse it? Anything? People were on their guards. It was still the Cold War. People were still considering safety, security, and anything. All that has gone out of the window for a long time now. People don't even think about that anymore. It's gone. It's over. Yeah? So that allowed Russia, of course, to grab more and more market share. And as long as they have the legacy gas volumes plus the new gas volumes, they can sell increasing amounts of gas until, of course, the first of the old field starts to deplete. And then it
And
drops off the
there's
cliff.
there's no way they can develop those fields at an affordable cost and compete with the Americans or anyone else.
Well, it is very look, compete with the Americans. That's another bag of worms because
Yeah.
I mean, if you just talk to sometimes even hardened energy professionals, they always start from the premise that LNG is more expensive than pipeline gas, which of course is a load of horse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why? Because I mean, if LNG would always be more expensive, why would anybody ever buy LNG? Or
Why
always
would they
buy
be
pipeline
building?
gas,
Why would they be building import terminals for it?
especially if you have access to pipeline gas. Yeah.
Right.
There's quite a number of import terminals here in Europe. There could be more, but I mean, we have big terminals over here. And we have quite a lot of terminals over here, so that's nothing to dismiss that. Yeah, why would those terminals ever be built if LNG is always more expensive? It's not, obviously. First, the gas price in Europe is determined by market developments. It's the TTF,
Yeah.
it's the MVP, it's the new TEH hub in Germany. For example, it's all those hubs that determine where the price goes. That has very little or nothing to do with whatever a seller country wants. Yeah, they sell it into this market at the price. They don't sell it. Doesn't matter very much. Yeah,
Right.
that's number one. Number two, whatever the cost is going to be their cost. Qatar can sell some of the cheapest LNG out there because at a time when it was comparatively cheap to build LNG plants, they invested heavily in it, and they were lucky as well. They were smart. They were lucky. They
Right.
did a lot of things well. They learned how to play the game and everything, and so now today they are capable of selling LNG at a profit when everybody else is losing money.
Right.
And it's LNG, and I would bet that this LNG that Qatar is selling quite a lot of times in terms of production cost is quite a bit cheaper than most of the pipeline gas that you would see anywhere. LNG
Right.
is if you have thousands
So
of kilometers
that
of
is another argument that's coming forth, is that LNG is now eating into the market share of pipeline gas, and it's been doing so for some years coming. So you've actually got a system that's going to be flooded with gas.
yeah, and well, look, I mean, this is Europe got a situation right now. It's not going to persist.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks now we are going to be in eternal pains. No, we're not going to be in eternal pains. Right now, we've got a problem, and our politicians are not very, very smart about this whole thing, no matter what country. Yeah, so
Which might be a blessing sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes it's good if they just stay out of it. Yeah, but we are on top of a very, very complex problem. The gas situation is just a part of that. We got the renewable situation still. We've got the public perception issue that is very, very mishandled still. But Europe is going to take care of that. It's going to take care of that, not in the best way. Europe has already contracted Japanese disease, so we are probably going to see 20, 30, or 40 years of no growth or very sluggish growth, almost some kind of slow recession, like you have it in Japan now for many decades. We see that in Europe over here. Some countries will do better in that. Some countries will do pretty badly in that. So it might even tear the European Union apart. That might be if countries feel very, very bad, things do break apart. That just happens. But eventually, Europe is going to deal with that. We will somehow find a way. We will use more coal. We will use more oil. We will use gas from other sources.
Well, the way I see it is that we have a high energy price at the moment, and that's a shortage in the market, shortage of
Yeah.
supply.
Yeah.
And all you need is that spells investment into developing, whether it's LNG, whether it's gas, even renewables. I know you don't like
Yeah.
them, but whatever it is, there will be a winner coming from this gambit now. That spells opportunity. It's
Yeah.
nice for me staying in the energy sector because I will have work. I will benefit from the crisis.
Oh, I'm pretty sure. I've never been afraid of not having enough work, actually, because look,
Yeah.
things it's like a pendulum. It always swings back,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
think we have already reached the outer extreme of stupidity on the pendulum. Now it comes back. Just a question of how long it takes until this whole thing takes enough momentum to just brush everything beneath it. But in Europe will deal with this. I have absolutely no issue with that. The maximum we're gonna see is short-term pain, and that's gonna kick some politicians into high gear. Don't worry about that.
No,
The
that's a
worst
good
problem
thing.
is for yeah.
Yeah. What do you think is going to happen if Putin tomorrow decides to turn on all the taps and cut off all the
Yeah.
gas flow?
Well, then we're gonna have a very immediate problem in a couple of countries, including mine, because our storages are not full enough in order to keep all industries running. You know that in most countries you have emergency plans. That means industry is going to cut off first.
Yeah.
That's going to make quite a number of people jobless. It's going to kill a couple of industries. People are going to be, companies are going to go bankrupt. Yes, it's going to be a calamity. Is it going to be worse than the COVID measures? I'm not sure. We have seen some pretty bad things over the last couple of years. If this is going to be worse, I don't know. One thing is for sure, our fear of that is very, very bad. Because right now people are afraid of anything if somebody sneezes. But
Yeah,
I
but
can,
politicians love fear. It's
yeah.
something
Well,
I
they play
just
with that.
accept.
But I can tell you
But I
one
mean,
thing.
a good thing that came from this is the UK has had some logical thinking in the last few weeks. So they've opened up the coal mine was it Cumbrian, I think, coal mine,
Yeah.
and they are saying they're going to untap the North Sea oil.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
And I have read also that they are considering cutting subsidies for renewables.
I thought they're doing that already, right? So
Yeah, they're doing. Look, this is the subsidies for renewables are a multi-layered thing. So you need to cut if you need to cut all of them in order to get to the bone of that. Yeah, that's going to take some time because some subsidies, like for example the free net balancing services, priority access to the grid, for example, and all those things, it's a subsidy. It's a valuable commodity in itself. All those things cost money that the consumer pays, of course. At one point, that will filter through. And when that filters through, politicians will attack it.
And then we will have the test whether or not they are competitive. The true test will come when the subsidies are gone.
Yeah. Look, I'm not opposed to renewables. I'm opposed to subsidies. If renewables can live without subsidies, well, be my guest. And there might be places on Earth where this is the case. It's I don't want to forget. I'm also not. I mean, I'm working mostly in LNG, but I'm absolutely not opposed to any kind of pipeline gas. Yeah, it's if pipeline gas is the better option for a given project,
you prefer competition, and you would like to compete against the people.
I like to see the best possible option that we can take for a problem, the best possible solution.
Right.
If that is pipeline gas, if that is renewables, I've never seen that, but I can imagine that maybe in some cases renewables might be the best option. Well, then go for it.
Well, they're the best option in South Africa, where the other energy sources are underdeveloped. They're not ideal. You would like some coal to be continued or whatever. You'd like something else to happen there, but some businesses have no choice but solar panels and batteries. Even if it's expensive, it's better than the alternative. So,
well, you know what? In South Africa, it's I think I don't know. Is the latest coal block finally working now?
I don't know.
It has taken an eternity to build that thing.
Yeah, it's just depressing. Somebody's got a question for you from South Africa. Yeah, he says, are there any prospects of LNG in South Africa? I just saw an article about the first shipment of LNG to SA.
Yes and no. I mean, prospects, there are always prospects if you want that. I have been in South Africa a couple of times, and we have been looking at the possibilities of getting LNG into the country. And of course, first you need to build a terminal because there's no receiving infrastructure. I personally think the best place for doing so would be Richards Bay. Very simply because you've got a pretty big and developed harbor that's used to industrial processes. That's very important. When people are not used to that and they suddenly see an LNG plant going up, they're afraid. So although there's not much to be afraid of, but perceptions. So Richards Bay, they have a good developed harbor that usually shouldn't have a problem with those kind of things. And it's also at the tail end of the only gas pipeline that South Africa has. And if you could use that to part of the LNG to supply consumers in the Richards Bay area, which there's a couple of very large companies that would be very happy to take the gas, and the rest of the gas you pump in reverse flow into the pipeline, you could also increase volumes used in Gauteng. So it's yes, there's a prospect for an LNG terminal in South Africa. The second problem that you have in South Africa is that it's pretty much out of the way of anything. If you look at LNG flows, even the largest LNG tankers pass through Panama and through the Suez Channel. That means pretty much nothing goes around the Cape of Good Hope. You have oil tankers passing around the Cape of Good Hope because they're too big to pass through the big channels. But the LNG ships, they all pass through it, so they never go down there.
Right.
South Africa is pretty much an island, total island nation, because there's nothing around it as well.
Look at airplane costs, airplane ticket costs. It's very expensive for me to go back home compared to holiday in the Middle East.
So it's I was for a while in my life I was interested in maybe living in the most remote inhabited place on Earth, which is a small island called Tristan and Cunha, and it's in the middle of the South Atlantic. It's as it is further away from anything. The closest people that you will have over there that are not living on Tristan and Cunha are those on the space station. They're going to be closer than anybody else on the surface of the Earth. And there's a ship that goes there every other week from Cape Town, which is 1,700 kilometers away. That's the closest human.
Okay, so at least South Africans are closer to aliens than the rest of the world. From that perspective.
So South Africa is really, really far away. But then again, I mean, look, if you do that, you need to do it the conventional way. You cannot be smart about that. You need to build a conventional terminal in, I would say, Richards Bay. I mean, there's plenty of other places, but the more west you go, the more difficult it will become.
Well, my challenge of that is, again, it's like the coal power plants. Coal makes logical sense for South Africa because we have coal. From all the engineering technical perspectives, there's nothing wrong with building more coal power stations. From the political management and corruption perspective, for that type of plant and investment, you need transparency and honesty in your system, and we don't have it.
You will have the same problem with gas and with LNG.
Yeah, that's the point I'm making. Like, so whatever the prospect is, it's a political, almost legal problem. I would argue it's not a technical problem. Technically, it's feasible. Richards Bay is a good place. Technically, Medupi and Kusile power stations should have been done in 5 years. It wasn't. It's the same problem with nuclear power in South Africa. We want to build 4 more. Great, we've had that plan for years. But is it going to be at a cost-effective way? And I don't think anyone who lives in a country can say that honestly yes to that answer.
I have never, ever in my entire life, and I've seen pretty much all continents except the Antarctica. I've been in many countries. I've seen pretty much anything that ever is remotely interesting in Africa. I have never seen a country like that, South Africa. From let's say from a religious point of view, there are so many people that actually already want. I mean, that happens in any country, but not at that scale. You've got black empowerment, you've got women empowerment, you've got a whole plethora of different organisms that exist for no other reason than accompany you with your project. It means rent seeking. That's it. Yeah.
NGOs are very good at this. It's
kills anything. Once we had a meeting over there. It was just an introductory meeting where we considered the 30,000 foot ifs, where we just contemplated everything around us. That should be an easy meeting where 5-6 persons are in the room and they are discussing the broad outlines of a potential project and everything. Right. You know how many we had in there? 70 persons, 70 persons, almost. It was 68 or something like that.
But that's because they get paid for the meetings,
The room was so crammed full. You couldn't hear anything. You couldn't see anything. And people threw in arguments that I've never heard in my entire life. I had many such meetings in other countries. But never ever have I heard things like that, except maybe in Germany
Yeah,
sometimes.
well, you wait until you get to our union meetings; they're even worse, you know.
No, I don't want to get there. No, it's
Um, Last question here on Russia. There's talk that if Russia doesn't sell the gas to Europe, they can move it to China or other Middle Eastern countries. What is your view on that? I guess the distance argument again.
um, how do you do that? Look, building a pipeline is nothing you do just overnight.
Oh, you just
You
don't
have
dream it up, you know?
you have a planning process, you have a conception process, you have a building process. That takes many years, especially at this scale. The power of Siberia pipeline, actually, they have fast-tracked this thing as fast as they could, and it's still not really finished. Not in its
Yeah.
full in its full capability. I think the reason for that is that Russia doesn't really make money with power of Siberia. It was more a political project. But anything in gas as well as in oil, well, must be said, that goes to Asia today comes from eastern Siberian fields. Those fields have been much more recently developed, and those fields are much deeper and much smaller than what you have in the western Siberian reaches. Anything that goes to Europe today comes from western Siberian fields. If you just look at where western Siberia and eastern Siberia is, and then you look at the distance between those two spots, you'll find out the pipeline system needs to be gargantuan. There have been plans to build such a connection. But I mean, in order for that to be meaningful, that connection would have to displace at least 50 BCM of gas per year. 100 BCM would be better. That would afford them real switchability, and then they still need to develop new markets. And even China is not somebody who is going to take the gas give us anything you can, because China is already reducing its gas consumption. Why? Because the economy goes down because of all those lockdowns. They don't need so much energy anymore. And China recently liberated LNG cargoes that were slated to be unloaded in China for the general market. So they can go to Europe now, anywhere else. That has never happened before. And China's economy, I think, is shrinking. I can't prove that. I'm not an economist, but I think China has been shrinking for the last 10 years.
Well,
We'll see
I
that
mean,
now.
I can substantiate that with 2 points. A few years ago, we would still buy a lot of spare parts and stuff from China, imported. But, it's just a thing everyone does. Factories are in China.
Yeah.
These days, they're coming from Indonesia, Vietnam, and some even argue East Africa. Labor costs in China have risen.
Yeah, have
And
risen.
that creates a service sector economy. All the factories might move away. So, even if the economy stays the same or even grows, it grows in a different direction. It's not going to be this factory-intensive area anymore.
No.
And I'm highly skeptical about the argument that China is the superpower waiting to take over the world.
No.
China, yes, they have a big economy, but they've got a lot of problems.
China has a horrible demographic problem. They have just found out a couple of weeks ago that China actually lied on its population figures for at least a decade. That means that China actually today has 100 billion people less than we believe they have.
So they just lost 100 million people.
It was believed just about when was that? A couple of years ago. It was believed that when you look at the current demographic trends, because China is shrinking already, the current demographic trends, the Chinese population would halve by about 2,100. That was believed a couple of years ago. That figure was revised down to 2070, I think last year, somewhere like this. And now, since we know the scale of the fraud, of the accounting fraud, and also looking at the enormous disparity between males and females in China, it's the biggest on earth, result of the one-child policy and everything, then halving of the Chinese population is probably going to occur by more or less 2050, which is just about 28 years away. That's a time span that I'm going to see probably, if I'm healthy enough. So I'm going to see China being half of what it is today, far less than 1 billion people. Well, who wants to tell me that this is a country that is economy? You still need people for economic growth. You can't do that with a shrinking population.
And I mean, there was a study done by Lawrence Livermore Laboratory in, I think it was 2010 or so, where it tried to measure carbon emissions. And look, carbon emissions essentially follow population growth as they peak, population growth peaks. And they predict that China will hit peak emissions by 2025. So that is when the population starts sloping down. That was not based on the old revised figures. So what you're saying, they've already passed the peak, and they're on their way out. And the age problem is, I mean, the saying is Chinese will get older before they get rich. They already have a problem where the Chinese kids, at least my colleagues, I've got a lot of Chinese colleagues that are leaving China because cost of living has gone up. They're my age, highly qualified engineers, because you have the 4-to-1 ratio, where it's 4 grandparents, 2 parents, 1 child. So 1 child taking care of 5 people. That is the population ratio that's approaching. So take that into account with energy, and now the Russians want to sell them gas on top of that.
And the biggest consumers is when you look in any country, it is usually the well-to-do top crust of the population that uses the most resources. That is normal, and in terms of energy as well. And when in a country the living conditions become so bad that people actually start to emigrate en masse, it's always the top crust that goes first because they can afford to do so.
It's a brain drain,
Yeah, it's a brain drain, and with the brain drain, you also have a consumption drain. That means the internal market actually collapses completely, because those who buy most, those who consume most, they leave. The old don't consume so much anymore, and they are the least likely to leave. Those who leave are young or in childbearing age or have children. So those are the people who consume most. And if a consumer economy actually loses those people, it loses this economic power as well. And those people usually go where life is a lot better, which will be, for most part, North America.
Yeah.
Let's be frank
some
about
places,
it.
Europe, North America,
Well, some places in Europe as well. I mean, Europe is going to be a very, very diverse place in just about 10 years, and even more so in 20 years. It's going to split up again, and countries, I hope so, will play to their own strengths anymore, because it's what's good for Greece is not necessarily good for for Germany, and vice versa. And countries must specialize again. My own country, for example, could make an awesome living only with tourism. We could be phenomenally rich with tourism only. We wouldn't need any kind of industries. Of course, we need industries as well, but it's we have winter tourism in the Alps. We have summer tourism because of the old imperial capital that Vienna is, one of the most beautiful cities in the world. It still is here, and we have a legacy. We have, of course, damaged that with our very stupid COVID policies that we have enacted over here, but that is going away now. So it's most of it is in the past already. What's left is going to be in the past very, very soon. And as Austria will have economic problems, just like any other country as well, people will start to think about ways of how to make new money. So Austria can do that. Like a country like Germany probably can't do that so much, because who wants to go to Germany for tourism? Yeah. It's like who wants.
So it's about specializing the economy at the end of the day. It will carry things forward.
Yeah.
I want to ask you sort of a future, semi-present future question. Russia's now invaded Ukraine. By the way, it seems to me that the Russian military in Ukraine is failing dismally. They've lost 20% of the mobilization force already. What do you think is going to happen, LNG-wise, if this war continues or ends up in a semi-guerrilla war that it's already probably devolving into?
We're in the prediction business here, and you know how those things often go. So I wouldn't have predicted the war actually to occur in the first place. I wouldn't. I would have, one day before Russia went in, I would have bet that they wouldn't do it. Yeah, well, I was wrong, obviously. So was most of the rest of the world. And so when it comes to predictions, is if there's two kinds of scenarios. Either the war comes to a pretty fast closing, which I think is only possible if Putin goes away in whatever way, and that can only happen in Russia. That kind of come from the outside.
Yeah, but who replaces him?
I don't know. I have absolutely no idea. I don't know the Russian system well enough. I don't know how the Siloviki work on the inside and everything. I have no idea. I cannot suggest anything. I think the only way for Russia to end this very, very quickly is without Putin. However that happens, I have no idea, and I cannot even give any kind of ideas about that. That's not my realm. If he goes away and it comes to a quick end, it only comes to a quick end if Russia completely withdraws from the entire country. And as things stand right now, I'm not sure if the Ukrainians are happy with leaving the Crimea with Russia. I think right now the Ukrainians consider that we have been through so much pain, blood, and suffering that now we go it through the bitter end. We want Crimea back. That's something that I hear from lots of places. Yeah, so I can imagine that if that is the case, we're going to look at a very long and drawn out conflict. In the long drawn out conflict, we're going to have sanctions. We're going to have discontinuance of oil and gas, slow or quick, I don't know, but it's going to happen. And then Europe is going to find alternative solutions for its shortfall of gas, oil, and anything else. That won't be pretty, but once you start walking in that direction, you start to create solutions. It's like, for example, when you lose your apartment. As long as in your apartment, you don't do really many things in order to have an alternative place to live. But once you know that in 2 days it's going to be either you have an alternative or it's going to be the street, and that gets you the
You
juices.
start phoning friends,
You start doing the things that you would usually never do. The same thing is going to be with Europe. Europe is going to find solutions once it's really in the predicament. Now, if that is going to come or not, I don't know. If the war finds its end this year, I can see that we go back to the pre-war situation more or less, at least in gas terms. So there won't be much of a change, which will also crash the gas price, because suddenly we have a surplus of gas because everybody was chipping into the market, and suddenly everybody breaks
the
down.
prices goes negative again, and we buy shares for next to nothing.
Yeah, this is if the war takes longer, the gas price is going to remain higher for a while, not forever, because reduced consumption in China might just provide the extra LNG that we need in order to keep Europe warm. And
do you think Russia, in with this war, I mean, I made the same mistake, I think, as well, overestimated its own importance in the world, and in the gas market.
it is very hard for a Russian leader, especially like Vladimir Putin, to make accurate assessments about anything. Very simply because when you are in a position of absolute power, as Vladimir Putin is, you live in a bubble. And even if you go all extra lengths necessary in order to pierce the bubble, because you know you're sitting in the bubble and you need information from the real world, it will still be strongly filtered. Now, that is true if you're in power for 2 or 3 years. Putin has been in power now for more than 20 years. That means the bubble around him is absolutely ginormous.
How long was Stalin in power? Isn't he Putin competing
I
Stalin?
don't know when he came into power. I know he died in 1953. So he must have been in power 53, 43, 20. He must have been in power about 20 years. I would guess. I don't know. A little more than 20 years.
That is the problem. I mean, I'm even against presidents having 2 terms. I've been, at times, I've thought maybe they should just have 1 term, we get rid of them for this exact same problem, because towards the end of the second term, they get all egoistic. Even then, their first term already.
I would give a president, in like in the US, for example, I would give the president 1 6-year term. That's it. Yeah. After that, there's no coming back. Yeah. But that's not the only thing. I mean, you would have to actually split that down to Speaker of the House, the Senate, and all those other things, and all the equivalents in all different countries. So it's giving the executive too much power and giving them too long terms. Of course, is inevitably a bad thing. We have seen that with Angela Merkel. I mean, her last 10 years were nothing short of painful. One mishap after the other.
That's a strange one to me. Germany doesn't really have term limits on that. I don't know.
Well, a parliamentary democracy, as most European democracies are, don't usually have real term limits in place. That's the beauty of the system. That's why the parliamentary democracy, I think, is the way more dictatorial system. In a presidential system, like in a real presidential system, like in America, for example, you've got some sort of accountability. I mean, I see politicians in the US pretty good regularity walk out in handcuffs and do real prison terms. I mean, real 10-year prison. That happens in America all the time, even to governors of states. Yeah. I've never seen that happening over here in Europe anywhere. Do you? know any politician that has been imprisoned 10 years for corruption?
No,
I
because
don't
all the French
remember.
ones would be in jail by now.
Oh, the Austrians would join them immediately.
Exactly. So it's just not going to happen.
And I think a whole slew of others as well. But look, I mean, that's just the nature of the game. Again, that's not the Russian specificity or German or French specificity.
Yeah.
It's the nature of the game. It could happen anywhere on Earth. Depends always on the outside and inside variables and factors.
Mm.
No, but what's going to happen to Russia if Russia turns the gas off? And this is the one point that I still wanted to make. Yeah, is that I don't know how long it takes for gas fields, but oil wells, if you top them or to turn them off, yeah, at some point the pressure in the wellhead is going to exceed the pressure limits of the casing itself. It's going to bust the casing. And then those wellheads, because they're going through, many of them go through the permafrost, many of them freeze up. Some of them are heated, but many are not.
When the frost gets into the cracks, you've got even more problems. So,
and this is you can unclog such wells again, but that takes a lot of money, a lot of expertise, and a lot of time. You don't do that just like this.
So unless the Russians are just going to put the gas on the market for nothing, subsidize it.
Well, they gotta keep it flowing because otherwise they're damaging the upstream, and I don't know if they really want to do that. On the other side, I don't know how aware a person like Putin is of the damage that he's risking. Because I mean, look at the mess that they have made in Ukraine. Apparently, they haven't been aware, or they have been arrogant, or we don't know. But I mean, if they just had an inkling of what's going to happen for real, I would assume that they wouldn't have even have gone there.
You know, I spoke before this thing started to friends of mine at St. Petersburg University, and they said to me that even the people studying this stuff in the politics did not expect Putin to invade.
No,
I wonder if he wanted to invade. I mean, I can only speculate. Maybe he did, because you don't mobilize a force like that without wanting to. But there's something that happened, and I think time will tell what the truth will be on that. It's just from any point of view. Look, it was completely idiotic. I mean, I was sympathetical to the situation in Donbass before the war started, and even some of the arguments Russia uses, like NATO expansion. Yes, I was sympathetical to some of it, but they just blew it. Every diplomatic leverage, blew it.
We shouldn't forget that just before the invasion, Ukraine was one of the most corrupt countries in Europe. That's what it is. I mean, there's no two ways about that whole thing. It was just, and there's a lot of things that are wrong in Ukraine that need fixing. Lots of things. I don't even know where to start. That being said, with the moment when Putin decided to put the first soldiers into Ukraine, it all became meaningless. Because he shouldered the entire responsibility for anything on his own shoulders. That's it. It's over. No talking about it anymore. It's once you do that, it's your problem.
Well, I would say it's unprovoked aggression. Was the Nuremberg of War said it was a supreme crime. So if you believe in those principles, you must condemn it. Equally so, you must condemn the Iraq War. Now, I'm waiting for those people to come around and make that argument. They're not doing it.
I'm here. I want to be totally frank and honest. At the time when the Iraq War happened, I have been to Iraq. I know all those countries pretty well. And it's at the time when the Iraq War happened, I was a lot younger than I was right now. I was a lot more idealistic, and I was in favor of the Iraq War. I was wrong.
Yeah,
I was totally wrong. I mean, this should never have happened. Yeah, I'm today with age. I have mellowed a bit, and I'm not very interventionist. I think countries should, deal with their own trouble. We shouldn't come.
Deal with it diplomatically. I mean, but this is my beef with the whole Ukraine.
And if you can't deal with it diplomatically, then just cut them out of anything. Look, you're not the kind of country.
Well, I don't buy the argument you cannot, because Russia and Ukraine signed the Minsk II protocol a few years ago.
And what it worked?
Well, the US in this regard didn't put pressure on Ukraine to implement it. I don't think anyone cared about it. As you say, Russia probably didn't care about it either. But the point being that there is a peaceful diplomatic solution in existence that can still be used as some basis. I think it'll have to be changed now, given what happened. But nobody talks about peace, in this whole conflict or non-violence or anything of the sort. It's all It's all more weapons to a problem, which is not going to solve it either. And the thing is, my wife and I went to the Ukrainian church here in Paris. First thing when it broke out. Now we didn't go to the service; they were inside, and we couldn't go inside. But what I noticed there was prayers in both Russian and Ukraine for the war to end. So there are people on the ground who don't want any of this nonsense, and they would like it to end.
Look,
And nobody is amplifying their voice. The war lobby is getting what they want on both
look,
sides, I think.
Russia cannot step back because it would be a loss of face, and a loss of face in Russia is equal to death, more or less. Yeah, so they can't do
Right.
that. And now they're in,
I,
and
I
that's
don't
it.
care about Putin's loss of face.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't care, but he does. Yeah, and Putin is, he's not suicidal. I mean, look at the meetings and everything, all the distance that he puts between himself and anybody else. Yeah, all this paranoia about COVID and anything. This guy doesn't want to die. That's not somebody who is suicidal. So he's still making rational decisions. He's in a horrible bind. I mean, he needs to do something that potentially makes him look weak, and he cannot look weak. So for him, stepping back is virtually impossible. I don't see how that whole thing can be squared. If anybody knows a solution, please come out with that. And the rest of
Yeah.
the world, I tell you something, the Americans have it easy now because they will fight the Russians to the last Ukrainian. Yeah, this is
Yeah, and
they have
Zelensky came in as the peace candidate. What happened to that? It's also
they have found a way to bleed the Russians to death without even lifting a finger, except delivering weapons, of course. Yeah, I mean that's
yeah.
perfect for them. It's like a Christmas and Easter at the same
It's
time.
in Afghanistan without training the Mujahideen.
Absolutely, yeah. They're doing it all by themselves, yeah. So it's there is very few people are really interested in peace, except people. But those in the decision-making circles, politicians, diplomats, and everything, there's very few who are interested in peace right
Well,
now.
I mean, if you take it, there are some voices asking for this, and I just hope that with the elections in America coming up, that if Ukraine escalates to a big conflict, it'll cost the American president because nobody wants to implicate more American war soldiers in a war. They don't want dead bodies coming back, but so they've trained Ukrainians to fight the Russians.
Yeah.
Also, some thuggish death squads there that has to be named. So there's a lot of geopolitical craziness going on over there. None of it justifies Putin's actions, but it's just the sensible argument of saying, let's get this thing to a closing. Let's not get Ukraine into NATO if that is really the problem. They can be like Austria. I mean, you guys aren't part of NATO, and I think you're fine as a country.
Oh, I'm personally very happy we're a neutral country because I mean at least we had this discussion just a couple of days ago. It's what would happen if Russia went nuclear, and I was looking at bomb yields and what would happen if this city or that city was hit by a nuclear bomb. I mean, Austria would certainly not be on the target list. Why? Because we are not a worthwhile target. It's completely useless. There's nothing here that's worth being destroyed. We're neutral. I mean, we sometimes are really, really stupid, but we're still neutral. And that's why the closest bomb that might ever explode to Austria is going to be Bratislava, because Slovakia is the next NATO capital that we have.
Yeah.
I don't expect that, but that's the only possibility that I ever see. And if you look at conventional yields of Russian nuclear bombs, even the big ones, even the Sarmat bombs, we wouldn't even feel it over here in Vienna. And Bratislava is really close to us. We wouldn't feel it in the least. So do I want that? Nope. Absolutely
So
not.
you're happy for neutrality.
I want the war to end now, in this very moment. That's what I want. That's what I really, really want. But
Well, I think
I'm happy we're neutral.
many people in Europe want it. I hope now in France that Macron steps up a bit. He was flirting with this before the election, but he didn't want to take a stance because it's elections. But I would hope that the French if Macron puts his foot down tomorrow. I mean, France is about the biggest military you have on the European continent. It doesn't compare anything to America, but it's a nuclear power as well.
Yep.
You shouldn't forget that. If France tomorrow says, look, Ukraine is not part of NATO, let's negotiate for something comparable to Minsk II, get Russia to a closing. Apparently, Macron is still speaking to Putin. That is kind of what we want. Whether Russia will listen, I doubt it. Whether America will listen, I doubt it. But, better things have changed quicker.
I think Ukrainians won't listen. Very simply because they already got a lot of weapons. They have found out ways of how to produce their own weapons, and they are actually working pretty well. They're very, very innovative when it comes to applying whatever they have onto the battlefield.
And
And
they've
I
killed a
think,
lot of Russians as well, so they feel like they're
yeah,
winning some part of the war.
yeah, they feel like they're winning. So right now, I don't see the Ukrainians actually giving into anything. I mean, they probably are out for the maximalist position which is Russia gets out of all of Ukraine. That includes the entire Donbass, and that includes Crimea. Anything else they won't settle for. That's what I feel.
What I've seen now is Russia has mobilized. I think they mobilized 100,000 soldiers. They've lost 20,000. The Ukrainians apparently has lost a little bit more, but it's on that magnitude. Now, Ukraine's army is 1/3 of Russia's size. But the question is, how many more dead bodies of Russians do you want, essentially, of the 100,000 before the mobilization becomes untenable?
Yeah.
And I suspect they will probably settle for something which was Minsk II, which is Donbass becomes federal or part of Russia, who cares? And, rest of Ukraine stays where it is. And that's sort of where the borders are being drawn at the moment. Russians have already withdrawn from Kiev and people are going back there.
I don't see any kind of compromise like this right now. I mean, it would maybe be sensible. I don't know. Yeah, and I cannot speak on behalf either of the Ukrainians nor of the Russians. That's not
Yeah, we can only speculate. Yeah,
we can only speculate. Exactly. Yeah, I personally don't see that, but I'm happy to be wrong, to prove them wrong. If next week we have a peace agreement and anything like that comes to pass, yeah, anything, you all have the first cheerleader sitting here. Because this conflict, as if it's over, it's over. That is just more important to me than anything else. But then again, I'm not Ukrainian. I'm not Russian. I'm in no position actually to wanting anything from that, except hopefully there won't be worse things than we see already now, which is bad enough.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen war twice in my life. Once in Africa, once in the Middle East. I know what it is. It's not a pretty thing, believe me. It's really not a pretty thing. And most of the time, we see war through a lens, because when it happens in Africa and the Middle East, it's not, those people are not culturally as close to us as the Ukrainians are. Today, we relate way more with the Ukrainians and their plight, because those people look and feel a lot more like us.
And it's on the media 24/7, so
Exactly,
and the empathy is being weaponized as well. We cannot.
But if you look at wars between, like, for example, Eritrea and Ethiopia, you have tens of thousands of people dying there, really big numbers and everything. Nobody gives a damn. It's
but it's also expected in a way from there, not expected in Europe. That's kind of the narrative being sold. It's not the right narrative, but it is what it is.
Well, we have been living in a very, very long area of peace. As it is with all those areas, it's going to end one day, and it just looks like it's ending right now. The only reason why I think this is not going to be a world war is because nobody can take it up with the Americans right now. So you've got one superpower that is able to extinguish any conflict if they really wanted to, and that's why nobody will go that far. Nobody will try that, except if you
look. And I still think even in Russia, there is enough rationality left to not want to have a thermonuclear war, because that kills everyone on the planet. It's completely idiotic.
It's not going to kill anyone on the planet, but it's going to kill a lot of people.
It's going to put us back to the Ice Age, or to the whatever,
that's overrated. We don't have enough yield on nukes anymore today in the world in order to assure planetary demise. That's not going to happen. But I mean, the damage is going to be absolutely biblical. That's for sure.
All right. Rudolf, thank you very much again for the conversation, for educating us on Russian gas. So, I hope everyone enjoyed the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.